Welcome back, everyone. I know some of you have been curious about all these things about Webpack and Babel that we occasionally mention throughout this course. If you remember from one of the initial lessons that we taught, the big thing about Create React App is that it hides away all of the Babel and all of the Webpack configurations that you would normally have to figure out. It's one of the big advantages of Create React App because Webpack and Babel have a lot of possible configurations that you have to do. However, if you just wanted to get started with a React application, having to learn those two new technologies is a big overhead. But now that we've gotten really good at React and using Create React App, I think it's about time that I show you Webpack and Babel. I'm going to show you how we can actually set up our React application to run Webpack and Babel in a very easy and efficient way. I'm going to show you with as little code as possible so that you can understand what is happening with Webpack as well as Babel. Both are actually quite simple, and with the newest versions, they've really reduced the amount of configuration that you have to do for either. So in this lesson, we're really going to look at the bare bones of what we need to set up so we truly and deeply understand the concepts. So with Webpack, what you can do is actually go to this link I'm going to provide you inside of your resources, and it's going to take you to this repo. This repo I have is just the most fundamental bare bones React implementation before any Webpack has been included. So simply fork this project so that you get a copy of it, and then once it's finished forking, simply clone it down. So you're going to click your own, and you're going to click clone, and make sure to use HTTPS if you are not set up your SSH. If you have set up SSH, then you can clone with SSH, otherwise use HTTPS. So just copy this key, and what we're going to do is go to our terminal, and we are just going to clone it down. Now, I'm going to call mine Webpack project because, of course, I made this project, so I have the same name already. But let's just clone down whatever name you want. I'm going to call mine Webpack project and cd into it. Now, let's take a look at what we have currently. And what we're going to look at is just inside of our source folder. So far, it's a very simple application. It has an app.jsx, and all we import inside app.jsx is React, our style sheet, and then all we have defined is this app div with a card div, and inside is an h1 that says our React is working. The most simple app component that you can imagine. So what I do is export this out by default and bring it into index.js. So as you're used to by now, this index.js file is where we're going to enter from our application. So in here, I also import React and React DOM. I import our app component that I just made, and then I render the app and I replace the element with the ID of root. We can find that inside of this index.html file, that in the body, there's just this simple div with an ID of root. This is as simple of a setup as possible. But we have a React component, we have some styles, and we want to output a optimized build with all of this converted into a version of JavaScript that our browser can understand. So we understand all this about React already. We know about Webpack, we know about Babel. What they do mostly is that Babel allows us to convert files into other files that our browser can understand. That's Webpack's purpose. So this JSX code we've written, this JS code, even the HTML and the CSS, all of this is currently in a format where we're importing it in a style that older browsers can't understand. This import style comes with ES6, and ES6 doesn't work for some browsers because they only support ES5. So this is what Webpack's main goal is that Webpack wants to help us convert all of this code into versions that browsers can understand. So let's actually explore this. In order for us to use Webpack, we have to bring it into our application. So I'm using Yarn. You can use NPM if you prefer NPM. One thing to note with NPM is that every time we install a project, you have to make sure that whatever we install at the end, you append --save-dev. Because these are developer dependencies and not regular dependencies. With Yarn, you don't have to do this. This is just a thing to keep note. To get started, we need to add two packages. The first is Webpack, The second is Webpack CLI. So it's got to be yarn add. So these two packages allow us to begin using Webpack inside of our application. In order to use Webpack, there's two things that we got to add to our actual application. The first is a file inside of our root folder called webpack.config.js. When we run Webpack, Webpack will automatically know to look for this file. And in order for us to actually run Webpack, we have to add a new script inside of our scripts object here in our package.json. So what we'll add is this build script. And this build script is just going to run webpack -- mode production. So this is saying that I want to run Webpack, use the configuration.js file, and then I want to spit out a production build. So this is similar to pretty much what we see Create React App does when we run our build script in our project before. It was just hiding all of this away for us. The thing is that inside of our Webpack config, what we're going to do is we have to remember that here we don't have ES6 syntax. We have to use the old ES5 syntax. So in order for us to export out anything, we have to say module.exports equals this object, because what we're trying to export out of this file is this object of configuration options. We're going to say module, and we're going to define this thing called rules. So inside of Webpack, it's got many modules that you can run. The first one is rules. Rules is a way to define Webpack what it needs to do based on certain file types that it encounters. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, as we know, we are writing JSX code or ES6 JS code. Webpack doesn't need to convert CSS code over into JS code, because with CSS code, if it's using Sass or if we're using some other version of a CSS library that does not come by default with most browsers, we need a different set of rules than our JavaScript rules, because we need a different set of loaders than JavaScript loaders. And this actually brings us to the concept of loaders, but we'll talk about it once we start writing out this rules object. So what we're going to say is we are going to say that this test string is what we want to match against. So what type of file extensions we want to match against. Now here you're going to actually have to write a little bit of regex, and it's actually not so hard. I'm going to give you a regex builder, but we're going to say that inside of these slash marks that we want to look up any files that end with the dot, and then we're going to say JS or JSX. And then you add the $ to empty or to end the actual test. So this is just saying, I want you to find me any files with the extension .js or .jsx. That's all it is. After this, we want to exclude our node modules because we don't want to run or build any of our node module code. The packages that we download are already optimized. They don't need to run through any of these loaders. They're already converted ahead of time, or they should be. At least a good library is. And then what we're going to say is this use property. So the use property tells Webpack what loader it needs to run. And the loader is going to be the helper that actually converts this code into the actual version. So you can kind of see Webpack as the coordinator and the loaders as the actual packages that transpile this code down into the version that we want it to be. And here is where we're going to use Babel, because Babel is the library that helps transpile JavaScript and JSX down into older versions of JavaScript. So we're going to include in a couple other libraries related to Babel. So we'll go back to our terminal, and what we're going to do is we are going to say yarn add at Babel core. So we want the core Babel library. We want at Babel / preset env. And this library, the preset env, comes with transpiling ES6 down to ES5. That's all that library does. We also want Babel / preset react. Now, of course, Babel can convert everything. It can convert Vue. It can convert Angular. It can convert Aurora. It can convert all kinds of different JavaScript libraries down. You just have to pick the specific ones you want. That's why it's all at Babel / and then the name of the smaller library we want to include. We also need to include the Babel loader. So these ones were for our actual Babel configuration. The Babel loader is just so that we have the Babel loader for Webpack. And once we have this, we can go back to our application. And now what we're going to add in is inside of here, we're going to say the loader, we want to use the Babel loader. Now, what Babel loader knows to do is look inside of our root directory for a file called Babel RC. So the Babel RC file is going to be the file that tells Babel what it needs to transpile down to. And here we're just simply going to create an object where the presets is the property that points to an array. And inside of this array, we're going to include those two presets we included. The first one was preset env, which, as I explained, converts ES6 down to ES5. And we're also going to include Babel preset React. So this compiles React down into ES5, or another version of JavaScript and HTML that our browser understands. So if you've ever been curious, why is it that you can put .js or .jsx and our code always works? Well, under the hood, this is what's happening. Create React App is doing the exact same thing. It's just taking all of our .js and .jsx files and running it through the Babel loader anyways. That's why, even though you're writing JSX code and appending your files.js, your code still works. This is the loader that's doing that for you. So hopefully with this, we now understand what it is that Babel did. Babel's very simple. It is a loader inside of Webpack that converts JavaScript files into older JavaScript files. It uses certain types of presets that you pass to it. And of course, there's other configuration options you can add if you want to be more explicit. You can find those in the documentation that I'm going to link in the resources. But this is the base that we need in order to convert our application down. So with this, hopefully we at least understand what Babel does with JavaScript. Now, we can't test this until the very end once we set up some other things, which we'll do in the next lesson. But conceptually, this is all Webpack and Babel do. So let's move on with the next lesson.